Welcome to everyone. Thank you for attending the monthly Bravery Angels film discussions. If you didn't know, these are every single month. I have joined this group about, June of 2020, and it's been just about every month since then. We very occasionally skip for December, but I want to say welcome. And if you are not familiar with how to get information on these, it's always on at least two places. One is on the events tab of the Bravery Angels website, and the other is over the general Braver Angels email list. There is not a film club or film discussion separate email list. Braver Angels does it all together. So just know that you want to check that each month to see what we're showing next. And we do like recommendations. We don't approve like every single one, but definitely feel free to message our group leadership with with ideas about other movies to show. We tend to do some, liberal leaning ones, some conservative leaning ones, some in the middle that present multiple perspectives. And we usually do about one a year that is showing how to do a Braver Angels style kind of relationship building event, whether that's, from BA members or others. I also want to introduce us. I'm Molly, so I'm one of the film discussion team leaders. We also have Donna here, Donna Murphy, Stephanie Zamora, Ivan K. You didn't put up your last name. Sorry, Ivan. And
Kaisan.
Say again.
Kaisan.
Kaisan. There we go, Kaisan. And we also have Ron, who's not here tonight, sadly, but will hopefully be back with us later in the fall. So with that, I'm just going to say welcome to everyone, and also welcome. We have a special guest here tonight, who Donna will actually be introducing, but we are always honored and excited when a director or a producer of one of the films that we do a show to our members or discuss with our members is able to join us. And tonight we are lucky enough to be graced once again. And so I want to allow Donna to make that introduction more formally.
Actually, that's Ivan. Go ahead and introduce Scott Hamilton Kennedy.
Okay.
Yes, I'll go for it.
He's here. Okay. Director, producer, and writer of Shot in the Arm is Scott Hamilton Kennedy. Scott has worked on everything from documentaries, feature films, music videos, commercials, animation, and reality TV. His Oscar-nominated documentary called The Garden, tells the story of the struggle to create the nation's largest community garden. His Independent Spirit nominee, OT, Our Town, is about the first play in 25 years that was staged at a high school in Compton. Finally, his critically acclaimed Fame High follows 4 students through a year at one of the most respected and competitive performing arts high schools in the country. And turn it over now to Scott. We have a bunch of questions for Scott. Is he here?
Yeah, yes, he is.
Yeah, but he's muted.
Oh.
Yeah, Scott, why don't you unmute?
Okay, to start things off, Scott, we have this opening question.
I'm unmuted. Sorry, everybody.
Great. We always ask people who are associated with the movie to start off with this. Why did you decide to make this movie?
Sure. As people probably saw in the film, this is a film that started in 2019 when I was looking at record-breaking measles outbreak, state of emergency in New York City, and asking why this was happening. And I did my lazy Google search and saw that we're on the brink of eliminating measles from the United States in 2000. We wouldn't even have needed the vaccine anymore. And so why is this outbreak occurring? Why are we seeing a state of emergency in New York City if that was the case? And I reached out to Dr. Paul Offit at Children's Hospital Philadelphia, and he said, Scott, it's never a matter of if, it's a matter of when you see. Sorry, he said there are people out there that are convincing families to be scared of vaccines. They've come to be known as anti-vaxxers. And it's never a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to see measles outbreaks in those communities. So we started the project and filmed throughout 2019 and thought we had a pretty important film. And then COVID happened and it went to this whole other place, including one of my favorite parts is that it got to our social contract and how fragile that is,
Right.
and how important that is to a functioning democracy and a functioning society.
All right. And I guess you've screened this film for a number of audiences. What sort of backlash have you received from others due to the making of the movie?
Not luckily, not a lot of backlash actually.
Wow.
There's at least not that I've heard as much. The people that see the film really like it. Even people that might not completely agree with all the science. Science is extremely well founded and vetted and vetted and vetted. But even if they don't like that, we're defending public health, and they have some different opinions about that. Empathy was a huge driving force for the entire film. Was to have empathy for everybody involved. Empathy for mothers. My nephew is autistic, and have empathy for the mothers, like my sister, taking care of children who are autistic, but distinguishing between that, and there's no connection between that child being autistic from the MMR vaccine. And luckily, my big sister didn't take any of the bait from anti-vaxxers who were spreading misinformation about that. And she did the best work that she could with Nikki. And people told her, Nikki's probably, my nephew, will probably never go to college, or probably never drive a car, or probably never go on a date. And he's done all of those things. He's about to graduate college. So that's what can happen with healthy interactions with these things. And sadly, one of the most or heartbreaking things about people not just being wrong about the MMR not causing autism, it makes them look at their children in a different way, where they say that somebody did this to my child. And it's a very dangerous and sad energy.
Oh, okay. And for folks that are wanting to ask Scott a question, we will provide that opportunity in a bit. First, another question. How would you compare the reaction to the measles vaccine compared to the reaction to the COVID vaccine?
Oh, that's a tough one. I wish I had Paul Offit on with me. So the measles vaccine, by all measures, was extremely successful, right? There were times in the United States where it was up at 98%, 92%, and above acceptance by every family that had a child born in the United States. And it was extremely successful at keeping those children safe. And then there were pockets of communities that did not vaccinate their children, and you saw these measles outbreaks. So it was quite accepted, with some pushback from people that thought that the vaccine caused autism falsely. But the COVID made everything political, is the sad thing. The beautiful thing about science is it isn't political as a functioning. People can make it political, but as a system is just a tool for us to make decisions about how to go forward and assess risk and assess solutions like vaccines. It's not political, just like a virus. A virus doesn't care if you're blue or red or American or British or Samoan or anything. It will just attack you and try and survive and try and keep moving forward. And the beautiful thing about science is it doesn't care about where you're from either. It's just trying to find the best solutions and avoid the biggest problems. So yes, it was very frustrating to see during COVID how many things were made political. And yeah, I was one of the people who was hopeful in, say, May of 2020 that a once in a century pandemic might be the end of a lot of this anti-vax, anti-science rhetoric. And boy, was I wrong.
Mm. Okay, one more question from the moderators for the director, from Donna.
Yes. Hi, Scott. Thanks for
Hey,
being
Donna.
here.
Hi.
Hi. So my question to you, it's kind of long, excuse me, but your movie talks about a social contract that asks us to think beyond our own immediate desires and do its best for the greater good of other people. So now one of the anti-vaxxers in your film, Del Bigtree, interviewed shot in the arm producer Neil deGrasse Tyson in 2023.
Yep.
And Bigtree maintained that the COVID vaccine was tested on whether it kept recipients from getting sick and not on whether recipients kept others from getting sick. Indeed, he said it masked symptoms, so some recipients who got COVID despite getting the vaccine didn't know they were sick and then went out and potentially infected others. He also said that the chances of people getting COVID were highest in the population of older people and minuscule among 0 to 19-year-olds. Thus, it should be up to the individuals to calculate their own risks and decide for themselves whether they should get the vaccine. So could you please respond to what Del Bigtree said?
Wow.
By the way, that was a lot of information, so I'm going to drop that in the chat as well. So
Yeah,
you
and
can review that if that's helpful.
thank you.
Sure.
And I shared that with Scott in advance because I know it
Oh.
was helpful. Yes,
Great.
go ahead.
Yes. So I don't mean this to be critical, Donna, but you made Del Bigtree sound as scientifically valid as he could possibly be made to sound.
Mhm.
Now let me explain.
Sure.
He was cherry picking in a variety of ways to try to win an argument. He was not attempting by any stretch to say, let's have the healthiest conversation about what a vaccine is, how a vaccine can help, how was this COVID vaccine tested, is it a net, as risk assessment goes, is it a net benefit to the world? And the science on that is absolutely true, that it absolutely is a huge net win. And let me give you a line that he said in the film. In 2019, I was interviewing about measles. He said, well, this is Del Bigtree at the CDC in 2019. He said, well, measles, people say measles is deadly. I mean, anything could be deadly. I mean, water could be deadly if you drink too much. And he says, if Ebola was sweeping the country, talk to me then. As if he's saying, if something was really dangerous, he would have a different conversation. Then COVID happened, and he didn't have a different conversation. He continued to foment cynicism, misinformation, and disinformation. So sadly, I want to have as open a conversation about something, but Del Bigtree is not a fair player when it comes to honest communication. So sorry that it has to be that long-winded, but that's a start to answering that question. To the details of every element of what he's saying about the COVID vaccine, I'm sorry, we're going to have to bring in Paul Offit, and which I can link anybody that wants to contact me. I can link them to, can link you to the CDC to get those detailed answers. But all I can tell you is he is attempting to make it seem like he is being a nuanced person about the situation, and he is cherry picking to try to foment fear and doubt, not just around the COVID vaccine, around the institution of public health, the institution of science. And that is terribly frustrating.
Okay, thank you very much for your detailed answer, Scott. And now we only have you for a short time because you've got a parent-teacher conference you have to get to. I understand.
I'm on campus right now, everybody. I'm so sorry. We got double booked, but I'll be here for a little while. We're okay. Keep going.
Okay, so I want to give an opportunity for a few of our attendees to ask questions.
Of course.
So, Ellen Asuna, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay. Hi, thank you. Before I get to the question, I just want to say a couple things very quickly. The film managed to, of course, find the most annoying lines that Del Bigtree has ever said. I always disagree whenever he conflates the dangers of COVID with the mortality rate, because COVID is much more dangerous than the mortality rate implies. However, was he invited to have a conversation and be actually interviewed for this film? Because yes, there's plenty of footage of him online, but when that is selectively edited, and the thing about Del and people with very big personalities, it's not about him. It's about the people that he listens to. And he has the science that they talk about is available on their website, linked all the way down to the clinical trial data, the original documents that are winning in court. So actually, if I only can ask one question, I will say, why did your film ignore early treatment completely? because during the timeline that there were some emotional things in the film about people getting sick with COVID and all of that. I'm not minimizing that at all. There were plenty of doctors who Del Bigtree and others were talking to, but no one on the left seemed to talk to them, talk about politicizing media, politicizing medicine. When Dr. Pierre Kory spoke at the Senate about ivermectin, the very few Democrats in that small room walked out. And then he was insulted in the New York Times. So medicine is political. I'm just respectfully asking, why did you ignore early treatment? Was Del invited to have a fair conversation? And the question you began by asking, at least one of the reasons for the measles outbreak was an intentional getting of measles, like we used to do with chickenpox, because that community chose to do that and then get natural immunity. It said, I don't know that much about the measles vaccine. I know far more about the COVID vaccine, but that's just part of that story that was not told. So, thank you.
Sorry, that was a lot. So which question would you like me to answer?
Why did the film ignore early treatment?
I don't know what you mean by ignore, but
well,
so
okay,
you're
actually,
saying...
I would like, I could say something. When I know I don't know you, maybe you don't speak for the mainstream media, but in July, I think it was, of 2020, some doctors came to Washington, D.C. talking about how they were having amazing success with hydroxychloroquine and zinc. And after that, what did the media do? They looked for information on these doctors, and they flooded the news zone with the words demon sperm, because one of them had said that in Africa in something in the past.
Sure.
So there was no interest.
I'm going to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Having
just for
a
time.
just-in-case kit for COVID and treating early, and the studies about HCQ were not trustworthy studies that were being flooded through the news.
Can we stick to stuff that's in my movie instead of that's not in the movie? Because what's not in the movie, we could go on forever and ever and ever.
Well, you had people getting COVID who were sick for 2 weeks and scared, when they could have been treating it on day one, sick for 5 days and less scared. So that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
I think I think she's viewing it as tied to the movie, Scott, because I think the idea, I mean, if I may step in at a very broad level, I think what a director chooses to include or not include is always obviously a hard choice. And so I think she's pointing to something she views as really important that wasn't in the film. And I guess I'm not trying to speak for you, Ellen, but I'm trying to understand myself. I think what you're saying, Ellen, was the connection is you wondered why what wasn't covered wasn't about the vaccine, but what wasn't covered that you saw was what the bad results, the negative results were for people even prior to COVID having the worst effects on their bodies. But I'm struggling a little here myself to understand.
Potentially, yet it also was about the vaccine, because it says right there in the EUA document that if there is a known treatment, the EUA is invalid. So there was so much dishonest science about treatments that doctors were using from day one, some doctors. And as far as consensus, the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance and their group of fellows around the world, that is the scientific consensus of people who were practicing honest medicine. They just weren't allowed in the conversation. And in the debate between Del Bigtree and Neil deGrasse Tyson, it seems like Neil didn't even recognize the names of like Dr. Peter McCullough or Dr. Paul Marik. He just said, well, just because you have an MD doesn't mean you have the right answer, which is completely true, of course, as a statement. But these are the heroes that were having success all the way down. And it's more than an omission for that not to be covered. It's the crafting of a narrative. And some people believe so deeply in the vaccines that they craft the narrative from the goodness of their heart. No. And maybe you are one of those people.
I don't believe in a vaccine. I believe in the best information we have available to us. And what it seems like we're probably not going to end up agreeing on is what is the best science to tell us what we should use and what we shouldn't use. So there's more data saying that ivermectin wasn't helpful and in a way was going to be harmful. right? And there's more data saying that the COVID vaccine saves so many more lives than ivermectin, right? And there's so much data to point to those doctors cherry picking, again, just like Del Bigtree, to try to say those people, big science is lying to you, and I'm your savior. And if they were honest brokers, they would be saying, and I hear you being so nuanced, and I really respect how much you're trying to say, Del Bigtree gets some of these things wrong. And nuance is such a beautiful thing, but I don't know if we're ever going to be able to agree on what we agree on is the way to determine what we should believe is true and isn't true. So allow me to finish. What would you say? I'm at my daughter's high school. What would you say to a freshman at this high school is a tool that they should use to determine which one of us might be right?
I would thank you for asking that. I would say following the information all the way down. So
That's
you
a
can
lot of
follow
work.
information it is, except there are honest people doing that for us. And yes, there are some people who speculate and spread conspiracy theories and are way too quick to run with numbers. But there are a lot of solid people. I would say the Midwestern Doctor is among them. There are a lot of solid people who show information all the way down. And even the ICANN website literally has the documents that are winning in court. So if a Washington Post article says a study on ivermectin didn't show benefit, how was the study done? When was it started? Were the patients lost? So I don't know if you've read the book, The War on Ivermectin, but that's an example of following information all the way down.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. You've made your point, and I appreciate that. I think we're going to move on because we don't have our director for much longer. Ted Borick, could you please ask your question?
Yes, let me put a little bias in here. And Scott is my son-in-law, and I appreciate very much the questions that come up here who bring out both sides of the issues or multiple kinds of issues. So I appreciate that of Ellen. I don't have a direct question of Scott, but as a promoter of Braver Angels and the principles that you have, I'd like to just say, I've seen all 5 of these films, and one of the things that has impressed me for your consideration is he's come in, I think, unbiased to do the best job he could in presenting all sides of an issue, or at least the major issues in the films that he's done. And I hope you'd agree that he's done that here, because we have both sides of it. I think another one that he did that I called to your attention, and Scott is the one on GMOs, and he'll have to tell you the name of that, but he demonstrated how science really affected, saving the papaya in Hawaii and bananas in Africa. And so he starts with these things to try and figure out what is reasonably scientifically there. And I'll finalize this by saying my favorite is the first film he did was the one OTR Town that featured my daughter, who subsequently became a Teacher of the Year in the state of California just this last year. But that was going to be played on 9/11 in Toronto. And so it was a very uplifting film that I think incorporates the principles that Braver Angel has to try and bring all things together in a reasonably safe, civil discussion mode. And so I just make that pitch.
Thank you, Ted. So with that advertisement, I guess we should check out Scott's other films. Now, Elizabeth, could you please lower your hand, raise your question?
Yes. So when I saw that this movie was about vaccine hesitancy, and I know it seemed that it started with measles hesitancy, I thought one of the main issues it would cover for COVID was, and the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was mentioned, but I thought the most interesting part of COVID vaccine hesitancy was the element that there was this effort to try to fix this. And so COVID was rolled out into all these predominantly Black neighborhoods who, from, when I was thinking about it and when people I know were thinking about it, were thinking Black people in this country are not going to trust that because of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And now you're putting all of this brand new vaccine in these Black neighborhoods. I think that is a very valid reason to be hesitant, because the government has done such wrong to you in the past. But it seemed like all the people who were anti-vax were just these like, Pacific Northwest liberals. And maybe that was just cut, but I was really, since there was a clip about the syphilis experiment, I didn't know why that any of that was not covered at all.
Okay, Scott, can you address that?
Yeah, again, it's so difficult making a documentary and deciding what goes, what stays and what goes. So there's thousands of hours that don't end up in the film. I agree with you that the Black communities of the United States had plenty of reasons to be wary of, is the government going to be treating us fairly with this vaccine because of the horrors of the Tuskegee experiment, which we again present in the film. The good news about Tuskegee is it actually turned the tide in terms of the way that we dealt with those situations. It made us increase the safety around vetting of scientific about any medicine being brought to the public, and the top Black public health public health institutions in the United States all backed the safety of the vaccine and also said that Tuskegee was wrong. So just because Tuskegee was wrong doesn't mean that we can't trust in public health, but it is absolutely valid to question it. It's a difference between being skeptical and cynical. Being skeptical because Tuskegee has happened, should I trust the government? Cynical is if I'm presented with all the evidence that this vaccine is absolutely worth taking and you still don't take it, that's when we get dangerously close to becoming cynical. And I want to fight against cynicism every way I can.
Okay, thank you, Scott. We may have time for only one more question. Lisa Mayer, could you ask your question?
Okay, hello. Thank you so much for giving me the time to ask a question. So I was super excited about this because I absolutely love Braver Angels and I love how unbiased they really work hard to be. And so I watched the film with interest, and especially since it said that it features pro-vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, and I've been following the High Wire for a while now, and I have found them to be incredibly grounded in the science. So I was really kind of shocked at how it very slickly, and the film slickly and subtly portrayed all of the anti-vaxxers in a really bad light and then the pro-vaxxers in a really good light. And so my question is, did you purposely do that, or was that some kind of subconscious bias in your filmmaking?
Wow. Okay. So again, I don't think we're going to agree on if Icon and the High Wire and Del Bigtree are honest brokers. So that's the first place to start. And I respect the fact that you have the freedom to listen to them and take the information that they can. But by all evidence, I can show you evidence that Del Bigtree has lied, that they're not using the best science, and that he is attempting to try and convince you that these institutions of science are wrong. And I don't trust him in that. It's not fair. So if you, in calling it slickly is a little frustrating, and I can't go and quote the film that he made called Vax that was the opposite of what you're saying, that everybody that said that they were anti-vax was made to be a hero, and anybody that believed in vaccines was made to be evil in that film. But all I can point to is, again, the verifiable science, the repeatable science, and the evidence of the people that in this film, Paul Offit, Karen Ernst, Blima Marcus, that what they said they wanted to do to help people, they tried the best to do, and they didn't manipulate the truth to do that. And I have overwhelming evidence that Del Bigtree, Robert Kennedy Jr., Andrew Wakefield manipulate the truth day in and day out to try and convince people of what is and isn't true. And I don't know what else to do here to convince you otherwise, but that's what led me. I'm not here to slam Del Bigtree. I'm here to try and express what I found with a ton of research of what is verifiably true and what isn't verifiably true.
Okay, well, I just do want to
I'm
respond.
afraid we're gonna have to, Scott, you've got to leave right now, right?
I can do one more question.
Oh, well then, do you want to go ahead, Lisa, with your follow-up?
Okay, so my follow-up is, so on a couple episodes ago on the High Wire, they featured Aaron Siri cross-examining some leading vaccinologists and asking, do you have, like, pointed questions, do you have studies that show that this vaccine doesn't cause autism? She said no. That vaccine, does that cause autism? No. Went through a whole she couldn't produce any science to prove that these vaccines don't cause autism, which that's under cross-examination. And this is a leading expert. And I really recommend that everybody go watch that. It's episode 388 on the High Wire. And I'm just wondering, Scott, have you watched that cross-examination? Are you aware that they don't actually have studies to disprove the autism connection?
Well, you can't prove a negative. So it's not a matter of proving that it didn't cause autism. It's a matter of proving that it did cause autism. And there's no evidence to prove that it did cause autism. So I've not seen that episode, but I've seen probably 30 episodes of the High Wire and seen over and over again that Del Bigtree is cherry picking and manipulating the truth to his ends. So I'm sorry that we have to end it there. But what did you think of the Samoa sequence? What did you think of what happened in Samoa and how Robert Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree handled that?
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
All right, so I was very interested in that, and I'll just say off the bat that I don't think that vaccination as a concept is a bad thing, and I think that it can help actually to give your body natural immunity. But I do think that we are doing it in a dangerous way by putting neurotoxins in all of the shots, like aluminum. They took out the mercury from most shots, but there's aluminum, and it doesn't, like, it's not a big leap to think, well, if it's a neurotoxin, it's going to cause autism or other issues with your brain. So I do believe that maybe there was some kind of rise in measles. I'm not sure how bad that was, or if kids died, or how many kids died.
Sorry, you saw the Samoa sequence.
Yes. Well, that's
So
what I'm saying.
Just to do it really very quickly. 2 babies died by mistake from the nurses, where they mixed a muscle relaxant into the MMR vaccine. Nothing to do with the MMR vaccine, just a mistake, a human error, right? One of the terrible things that can happen with medicine, and we found it out, and they tried to do the best with it. Robert Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree said it was because of the MMR vaccine, and they celebrated that they stopped all vaccines on the island, and that led to 5,000 cases of measles on that island and 83 babies that were dead. When in the past 20 years before that, when they were getting vaccines, there was basically 0 babies that died.
Okay, but that story leaves out how many babies had autism, how many babies maybe died of the vaccine.
What does that have to do with autism? There's none of this has to do with autism.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to stop here. Do you have time for another question, or is that it, Scott?
Sure, go ahead. Give me one more.
Well, okay,
Also,
let's see.
Donna?
Angie, yeah?
I just want to make sure Scott knows. So tied into this next question, if it does answer this, if you're able to tie it in, Scott.
Yeah.
I know at least 3 people, some of whom have spoken, some of whom have mentioned in the chat, they want to see where is the evidence. So pointing to more evidence like you already did in your film about the Samoans, pointing to more evidence might be helpful in terms of this next answer, because I know you can't keep up with the chat and answer questions simultaneously.
Sure.
So just wanted to mention that before the next person goes.
Yeah,
Sure.
well, Angie Lemons has had her hand up for before. So Angie, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, just as a follow-up real quick on what Lisa stated, as a matter of fact, the MMR actually has a 5 times the seizure rate of measles itself. And this has been proven in a scientific study that I can always give you a reference for. So that's just one reason why, even though those seizures might not be tied to the shot, if a child has a seizure and dies from it, even though they don't tie it, that's still a death from that shot. But my question is, you made a point in the movie about implying that Del Bigtree and RFK Jr. had made money by being anti-vaxxers. And I just wondered why you interviewed Paul Offit a lot, but you didn't mention in the movie that he owns part of the patent for the rotavirus vaccine, which is one of the reasons he's very promotional about vaccines, because he makes money personally from it. So just curious why you didn't mention that.
Yes, fair enough. Paul Offit gets paid in a variety of ways. I don't know the exact amount of money he gets from that rotavirus. He's been told me that it's actually very, very small. The biggest difference between those two things is Paul Offit has made money, again, based on the best evidence that I can find, off of being honest and and yes, he did work on that vaccine, and that vaccine was vetted and safety tested and brought to the public. And he gets paid as a pediatrician, and I've seen no evidence of fraud with that work. So he's being paid for doing honest work. What I'm showing you in the film is over and over again that Robert Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree, and this looks like it's not going to be a place that we're going to agree, are not giving us honest information. They're giving us enough information that you could do that little bit of a cherry picking on seizures and measles to sort of muddy what actually happened in Samoa, which was, by all evidence, they stopped vaccines because of misinformation. Babies died. They brought the vaccine back, and they stopped the measles outbreak. That's the evidence, and that's what happened. And Robert Kennedy Jr. never apologized for anything he did with that. Del Bigtree never apologized for spreading information about that. And if you can show me actually anybody that's pro Del Bigtree, can you show me one time he's ever admitted that he did something wrong? One mistake that he ever admitted? And it doesn't exist. So this is where it's, and I so respect this conversation that we're trying to have here, that we are having here. And I respect what Braver Angels is about, but there's going to be a spinning, everyone, if we're not going to agree on where we get our information from. If we're not going to agree that this is gravity, right? That we're not going to agree that on what is a way to find out what is valid information and what isn't valid research. That was the question I asked the previous person, and she didn't really answer me. She said, go to the bottom line of what I should tell my daughter, how to determine if shot in the arm is valid, if what you just said about the seizures is valid. And the correct answer is we have to go to the best repeatable science and the best people vetting that science to give us the information. That doesn't mean they're going to be perfect, but I can point to the science that says how successful the MMR vaccine is, how safe the MMR vaccine is, and the same thing for the COVID vaccine. And I can point to evidence that Robert Kennedy Jr., Del Bigtree, and Andrew Wakefield, the three antis that I feature the most in shot in the arm, have not done that.
Thank you, Scott. Are you done with questions, or?
I think I gotta go meet some teachers, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you so much for doing this.
I told Scott that we'd have a tough audience for him. And what I will do is I'm going to share the chat with Scott, and for the rest of us, we are taping this right now, and we will have the recording of this conversation up.
And I would be happy, sorry, Don, interrupt you. I'd be happy to do this again, but we should have scientists on. We should have Paul Offit on to defend the science, right? Because that's going to be I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a scientist, right? I stand by all the science in the film, but I'm not a scientist.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so very much for
absolutely. Thank you for doing
coming on and fielding tough questions for you.
More to come.
Yeah. Okay. And now we're going to transfer over to questions that we, the co-leaders, ask audience attendees, and Molly is going to start us off.
Thank you, everyone, for being on and sticking with it. I want to just mention that while we can share the chat with Scott, we obviously can't promise he'll get to every single concern or question. And I also want to mention that, like, this is a chance for open, honest discussion. Thank you for sharing things in the chat. We obviously can't respond to everything there too. I try to keep an eye on it, but okay. So first question, and apologies to the woman who came on who wanted to know what is the breakdown. I meant to answer you earlier. The way that these things work is usually we have a full hour, 25 minutes just to discuss the film. The way that it's working tonight is we spend, when we have the director on, we spend usually about a half hour. We went a little over tonight. We thought he could only stay till like 30 Eastern. But is we usually will spend about a half hour on with the director. And then when they have to leave, we'll switch over to audience. So we're going to do that now. Please stay on. I know we've lost a couple of folks, and I'm sad to lose anyone because I want people to feel heard. And this is a chance. So the first question for everybody is, and I'll put this in the chat, as a citizen of a free country.
No, Damali, what did you think of this movie?
I'm so sorry. I went too far down the page. Apologies, y'all. Okay, and I should also mention, I'm going to try to keep people to between 1 and 2 minutes per person speaking. I'll just give you like a 1 minute heads up when it's been one. Okay, what did you think of this movie, and what were your key takeaways from it? So what do you think of the movie? What were your key takeaways from it is our first question for everyone. Obviously, we've gotten a lot of insight on that already from the chat, but Annalise, go for it. You're first up.
Sorry, that took a minute. I loved it. I am a huge fan of Paul Offit. He kind of got me through COVID. I watched his COVID updates regularly. And I'm married to a biochemist, so we look at science a lot in our house. And I really appreciated how science-backed the documentary was. And I commend the filmmaker for that, as well as for the fact that the movie was very well done. The scenes from COVID made me cry, which is not super easy to do. And I just really appreciated it, and I wanted to thank him.
Okay, thank you. Go for it, Ellen.
Yes. So I thought it was obviously meant to craft a certain narrative, just the choice of like when things were placed, like someone would say something about, dangerous or garbage. And then, it would cut to Del Bigtree yelling freedom. And it so obviously painted certain people in a certain way. And it just seemed like there was no humility around a system that proclaimed itself so certain of the safety of the COVID shots so immediately, and just demonized anyone who questioned. And Del had a point that he was not invited. Like, how different may it have been if they had had actual curiosity and like, oh, this measles thing in New York, is it really what we're seeing it is? Or like, and just the, kind of like the hypocrisy of certain things in the film and the narrative, like don't make medicine political, or pointing to VAERS as a something, about safety. And now whenever anyone says something is happening in VAERS, they belittle it. So I could go on forever, but just one thing I recently put in the chat, just please look at an article by Aaron Siri. It's just reprinting what so the top vaccinologist recently put in the New England Journal of Medicine. And they're basically saying everything that Aaron Siri and Del, and not just them, but the doctors, have been saying for years, that vaccines should actually be studied, and they're not. So just, when we follow information all the way down, that's why one of the best books on all of the childhood vaccines is called Turtles All the Way Down. Because if you follow the information to its roots, there's not much there that's credible, especially about the COVID shots.
Thank you, Ellen. And I just want to piggyback on and say I had a similar critique when we were planning our discussion in advance, that I felt like the science of pro-vaccine people interviewed was covered more than the science that anti-vaccine people in the film believed in and shared and rely on. And so I appreciate people sharing things in the chat. I will say it didn't happen until about Tuesday. I invited a few doctors on the call, and unfortunately no one could make it. But I think one of the challenges is that there's always going to be some, some bias in anybody's individual opinion, even as a doctor as well. I want to switch over to Karina and then Angie, and then I think we'll close out this question just because of time. We want to get to some other very meaty questions. So go for it, Karina.
Thank you. So it's kind of an interesting question when you asking like, did you like the question, did you like the movie or not, right? It's an interesting thing because on the one hand, I appreciate the movie just because it's just another piece of evidence of just how well the big pharma propaganda machine works. And I will tell you quickly. So I've discovered that there was an issue of any sort with vaccines in 2017 when I watched another documentary called Vaccines Revealed. And it was basically full of testimonies from doctors and scientists. And I thought, how stunning, right? Because I didn't even suspect to be looking into this topic. There were nobody around me that were anti-vaxxers. And I thought that was so interesting that all these doctors were saying that it was only in the 10th, 15th, 20th year of their career that finally, right, they started connecting the dots and realizing what they have missed, right? Because they were just so programmed to think that this was the best thing in the world, right? This was such a great invention. And so then I started reading a lot of books. And so basically, from 2017 to 2024, it's been a few years that I've read and researched and watched lectures and talked to real doctors, etc. And to me, if you're going to make a movie and if you're sincerely, genuinely interested in the subject, then I cannot imagine why you wouldn't do much more of a research, right? And I understand it's impossible to jam it all into an hour and a half. I absolutely understand that. But I mean, at least you would attempt to show, like you said, maybe an interview with Del Bigtree, maybe pointing to certain books like, Suzanne Humphrey's book, for example, Dissolving Illusions, where she literally goes through government data on when the infectious disease actually went down, and it clearly shows that the disease was hovering above zero before the vaccines even entered the market. So the whole statement that vaccines saved us from diseases, that's a false statement, right? So I mean, there's so much, and we could literally talk for like a couple of weeks if we just keep going. But my point is, I do not believe in a genuine in the motivation being this genuine interest in the subject. I think it's a piece of propaganda. And I know, Ted, I apologize. I know this is your son-in-law, and I respect that, everybody has different opinions, but to me, this is how it felt. And I can, if I were to make a thesis or some sort of, write an article, I would be able to prove that this is a piece of propaganda. Now, I don't have evidence at the moment. I can't tell who got paid. I can't tell who's going to get what favors. But the point is, I've seen this movie before, movie meaning like I've seen this act before, and it's been done over and over and over. And unfortunately, it truly is messing with people's minds. But the good thing, or good news, if you will, is that unfortunately, there's so much empirical evidence of parents having, right in front of their eyes, right, their children being injured and suffering tremendous vaccine injuries that unfortunately, the word of mouth has done its job. So it's not Andrew, it's not Del Bigtree, it's not some other, anti-vaxxer. It's real life that teaches parents. And parents obviously have the first and foremost responsibility for their children's safety. And you know what? When they talk about social contract and how you're somehow responsible for somebody else's health, no, you don't. And the truth is, when your child gets injured, you're on your own. Emotionally, financially, I know a lot of families who've been ruined financially because their children have been so sick and so unrecoverable that there was absolutely nobody to help them. And if you try to sue somebody, it's not going to be the vaccine company because they're liability protected from liability by the 1986 Congress Act. So if essentially you're completely on your own, you can sue the government, the DOJ, so your own government you're going up against. And the court is a monkey court where if you're lucky, if 50 stars line, in your favor, maybe you'll get a settlement in 5 to 7 years. And who has the money, the resources, right, to go and, besides taking care of your sick child, to go and get that settlement, right, in 5 to 7 years? It's so hard to do that. And still, they paid out almost $5 billion in vaccine injury claims. So there's a lot to say. And obviously, like I said, we could be here for a few weeks talking about this. But the point is, the movie turned out to be a big piece of propaganda, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, I realized my timer had died, so if someone could actually time briefly instead of me. I'm trying to give people 2 minutes max to speak. When I get that back up, I'll go. Actually, we'll take one more. Angie, you close us out on this question. Then we actually are going to move on to the next question.
I'm going to be very brief because I just totally agree with Karina. And she already said most of what I was going to say, that they didn't mention facts like the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act and things like that. But so go ahead and move on to the next question and I will chime in later.
Okay, I very much appreciate that. Yeah, and by the way, I think an unbiased film I do want to put out that I actually believe it would have been very hard to do in this case But what I think is interesting is that it's less of a political, there isn't a huge political divide because there are people on the far right even and people on the far left who actually agree on this topic. So what's interesting is that this is a topic that we were discussing in advance crosses a divide as well. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next person asking a question, and Ivan, that would be you.
All right, thanks a lot, Molly. I want to ask about an issue that is very deep in this vaccination debate, and it's about freedom and individual rights. As a citizen of a free country, let me ask several questions, and you can answer any part of this. As a citizen of a free country, do you have the right to refuse a vaccination order? When should adults be permitted to put their own health at risk? Do others have the right to refuse to serve you if you decide not to vaccinate? Does your employer have the right to keep you from coming to work? Any of these, maybe you can take off from and just talk about this issue of freedom and individual rights. Ellen, please make a short one, please.
Okay. I'd say a prerequisite for any of that to even be considered is an honest health system with honest science. I think the bar for telling someone that they cannot work or get medical care without taking an injection, I don't think that's ever okay. However, if this vaccine did what they said it did, a vaccine, a temporary vaccine passport to go to a concert or something like that, in an honest health system where that's not a slippery slope into the digital tyranny that we are actually seeing, and where it actually really did reduce transmission, I could see, having some kind of conversation about that.
All right, thank you very much. Andalisa, I think I saw you next.
Thank you. I have asked myself whether we have an obligation to protect each other through vaccination. And while a mandate towards that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, as a former homeschooling mom, I had also asked myself a similar question about whether I owed the public school system the resources and obvious wonderfulness of my children to benefit the school system. And I think there's some parallels there. And while I am not super comfortable with a mandate in any way on either of those issues, I do think that charity and solidarity are very relevant values in this conversation. And I think that maybe it was a little bit selfish of me to keep my children home. And maybe it would be a little bit selfish of me to decide not to vaccinate my children. They are. But I think that charity and solidarity are relevant here. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Margaret, how about you?
Thank you. I will just approach the first question about, can you refuse a vaccination order? Because I think some of the other questions are about the, can you refuse an order from your employer? Just for me, that's kind of an entirely different thought world. It's a great question. For me, I've always vaccinated. I don't have the passion for it. I am passionate about so many other things in life, but I've not really had the passion to get to the bottom of the vaccination issue. But I respect that people do have those passions. I guess what I would say is, what I want to hear more of in these conversations is, can I refuse a vaccination order? Yeah, sure. Free to do anything you want, but also acknowledge to oneself that if I refuse a vaccination order and let's say I go into a birthday party and somehow someone finds out that because I didn't vaccinate, I caused some harm to them, acknowledge that I might have some responsibility there. But I think people honestly should be able to do what they want, you know, but just accept responsibility for consequences. Yeah, that's it.
All right. I think Karina, you were next.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so the answer to most of those questions is a no, meaning there should not be any expectations by employers of people getting any medical procedures that they are not interested in. It's definitely a violation, I think, of a basic human right to your body, to your, you know, just your, this is your, you know, your sort of sacred, I don't know, church, whatever you want to call it, right? This is your body. This is what the only thing you have really is for your, you know, sovereign possession. So the fact that people were arm wrestled pretty much, or arm twisted, I should say, into getting a shot and then suffering consequences. Again, you know, they left for with no support whatsoever. And that was so tragic. I mean, I can start telling you concrete stories, but of course we don't have time for this. And, you know, as far as, you know, just take it for a second, like just an analogy, right? So, you know, there's a lot of push for, you know, the climate change boogeyman, right? Which is topic for another day. But let's just say that, you know, they tell you that you should get a vasectomy because there's way too many people on this planet and you should not be so selfish, right? And stop reproducing basically, right? Because it's just way too selfish, right, of you. Is that something where you would draw the line or would you push back, right? So my point is your body, right, is always your choice. And by the way, we're not talking about abortions. That's also a very nuanced conversation. That's a separate topic. But the fact that we did not, you know, consider this to be a complete, just utter violation of human rights really shocked me because I thought what could be more basic than a person deciding what goes into their body. It just, you know, kind of blew me away. That was probably like the biggest shock that I felt about this whole situation. Yeah.
All right, thanks. I'll go to Eloise and then Molly, you can close us out. Oh, sorry, Eloise, Lisa, and then Molly.
Well, this is kind of follows up on what Karina just said. There's a principle called informed consent. It was the first principle of the Nuremberg Code, which is widely accepted worldwide, that you have a right to informed consent to medical procedures. And in the case of the COVID vaccine, the more informed people become, the less consent they're willing to give. The idea that the vaccine was 95% effective is really propaganda put out by the vaccine manufacturers. Pfizer is a serial felon. Pfizer has paid in the past millions of fines related to fraud and racketeering, and those fines go to the budget of the FDA. So the conflicts of interest are all over the place with this vaccine and other vaccines.
Okay. Lisa.
Okay, thank you. So when you're talking about this much money and this much power, the system is going to be unavoidably corrupt. I think we have to be realistic about that. The FDA and the CDC are controlled by pharma. They're captured agencies, and they're captured by, as Eloise said, an industry and companies that are serial felons that have knowingly murdered people. So we really can't trust our public health experts on this. We can't trust our agencies, and we can't really trust pharma. This always has to be a personal choice. We always have to be able to do our own research. And if you're one of the people that thinks it's okay to coerce people to take some kind of a medical treatment or an injection, just visualize that someday there might be a medical treatment or an injection that you know something about that might harm you and you don't want to do it. And if you give up that right now, you're not going to be able to refuse it, and you're not going to be able to participate in society or whatever they're going to do to you for not taking their product. So I think it always has to be personal choice.
Okay, thanks for that, Lisa. Molly, close us out, please. Oh, unmute.
All right, I will close this out quickly because we have so much other good content to get to. I'm really interested in reviewing what people have said in the chat about damages of vaccines. I come into this conversation not with a medical background, just with my sister and various others in my life. My brother-in-law and various friends are doctors and all are pro-vaccine. So I obviously, believe people I trust, like my sister, she's a great doctor, has been treating COVID for years, actually. And I would say that my personal opinion is driven partly by knowing that some friends of mine actually, I'm going to say the story for because I want to keep it brief. What I will say is my personal opinion is that if a private employer or even the government mandates vaccines, I think people have the right to refuse. We're not going to people's homes and vaccinating them in their home or forcing them to get a shot on the arm, right? What I do believe is that then that employer, whether the federal government or a nonprofit or a private employer like a school, does also have the right to then say you can't work from this workplace because the science we believe is valid shows that you're then potentially damaging other people's health. So just the way that I was asymptomatic, largely asymptomatic at the end of COVID, but still could have damaged other people and stayed home. I do believe in the idea that employers have the right to refuse for you to come in the office. I do think that should be paid sick leave. So I'm not going to say you should stop getting paid. But the reason I believe that is like something similar to what Deborah said earlier in the chat. Unfortunately, she may be gone now. But I believe that you should not be endangering other people. So that's where my belief comes from in terms of employers limiting.
All right. We'll have to move on. I'm sorry that the clock is still moving. I'll turn it over to Donna.
Thank you, Ivan. And I've got kind of a related question, which has to do with herd immunity. How should we reconcile people's individual right to receive or refuse a vaccine with the need to vaccinate most of the population to reach herd immunity? So with herd immunity, not everybody has to get vaccinated, but some percentage in order to stop the spread of a particular disease. And I think Samoa, again, treated by the film, is an interesting example where they went from most people being vaccinated for measles to telling people, no, you can't be vaccinated for measles. That's what the head of Samoa said. And then leading to that big outbreak of measles and death. So again, the question is about herd immunity. Again, not everybody has to be vaccinated, but unless a certain percentage are vaccinated, it can cause a major outbreak of a deadly disease. Angie, you've got your hand up.
Yes. I would kind of ask a question in response to that as far as herd immunity goes. The question is, if the vaccines really work as they're intended to, if they truly are so effective and safe, then why should someone who chooses to be vaccinated have to worry about herd immunity? Aren't they theoretically then protecting themselves, and everybody should be able to make their own choice? Now, of course, that goes to the question of, are the vaccines really working like they should? But that would kind of be my follow-up question.
Okay, thank you. Ellen, you're next.
I think this is probably a very giving other vaccines the benefit of the doubt. I would say this is a very different conversation if you're talking about the COVID shots and other shots. I know that Dr. Jessica Rose and James Lyons-Weiler have done wonderful work on explaining how the COVID shots are immunological disasters. They do not provide, they're just horrible for the immune system, and how it relates to the virus and many other things. Now, again, there may be other shots, perhaps like measles, where there is a concept of herd immunity, and what you're saying makes sense. And that goes back to the tragedy of there is no honest system to evaluate these products. And with that missing, nobody should be asked to even consider putting anything in their bodies from this current health system and, the apparatus that we have and what they have just done. But if that is overhauled and there's actually like honest people with honest data, I can't necessarily answer that question where I would fall on that, but I would be interested in knowing more. And it certainly shouldn't be black and white as, don't ever tell me or recommend me taking a shot. We just need honest information, and we don't have that now.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Karina.
Yes. So herd immunity is one of those fallacies, where, for example, they might say, we need, and they changed the numbers over the years. They would say, oh, we need 50%, percent vaccination. We need 60. We need 70. We need whatever the number is. The latest one I haven't checked. But the whole idea was based on, why we need to require them in schools, right? That we need to reach certain percentage. Well, if you think about it, so let's just say in school you have 70% vaccination rate, and allegedly it provides herd immunity. Well, the truth is the children do not live in a bubble within the school, right? Children exit the school and then they go and spread around and basically hang out with everybody else, right? Now, there's absolutely zero chance that at any given point we've ever had 70% vaccination rate in society at large, right? So if you think about what herd immunity is, right? It's not really, it's purported to be something that we can control, right? But the truth is, for example, if you had if you had some sort of infection, let's say it was measles, that actually provides a certain level of herd immunity that you can actually rely on, meaning it will go around. That's why people used to have measles parties, right? And get the whole neighborhood basically sick and then recovered, and then people had immunity for life. By the way, there's also research that having measles in the past will protect you from certain forms of cancer later in life, right? So there's certain wisdom that nature has that we just kind of keep ignoring. But those numbers are basically very arbitrary, and they just, it's part of the whole propaganda of basically saying, let's immunize more and more and more people, right? Until ideally, and that's, I know where they're going with this, until they basically have 100% vaccination rate. And chances are it's not going to be voluntary, which we've seen with COVID, right? It was making you so uncomfortable that you just throw in the towel and say, I can't travel, I can't, they're not letting me go back to work, I can't, go take classes, right? Go to college. And that's why I'll just give up, right? Or give in rather, and just go get my shot. And that's kind of how the system is designed, which is very wrong. But the second thing I want to say is the healthiest, I don't know if you guys have actually done this sort of as a research, but if you actually start looking for the completely unvaccinated people, especially children, you will never find a healthier group of people. And there's pediatrician Paul Thomas, who's had 3 groups of people in his practice, completely unvaccinated, partially vaccinated, and fully, quote unquote, vaccinated based on the current schedule. It was independently audited by a scientist who came in without any prejudice or any sort of agenda, right? And he examined the health outcomes in 3 groups. The absolutely healthiest children were the completely unvaccinated children, right? So
okay. Thank you, Karina. We're trying to keep people to a little bit shorter speeches.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Margaret, you're our last speaker on this.
Oh, thank you. I'm not a scientist, so honest to God, I don't really know if herd immunity exists or not. But I would say in terms of the question of, if an administration decided this is a policy goal we want to have herd immunity. And, I think it's, don't force anyone to get vaccinated. But as we do with other things, other behavior that we determine to be a little bit more risky, maybe you put a tax on that. And I mean, it doesn't have to be punitive or anything like that, but I just say that, and I'm not saying necessarily that would be the best way to handle it, but I do think there are ways that we can have people make individual choices, and people can make policy around that. And then, if it turns out that herd immunity taxation scheme was wildly unpopular, then, people can vote at the ballot box about that. And if it, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Ivan, you've got the next question.
All right. I want to shift gears with the little time we have left and talk about how would you run a federal response to a pandemic? If there is a possible pandemic underway, should federal health agencies restrict the public comments that they make so that they speak to the public with one voice, one consistent, clear message? Or, and this has come up again and again, should they promote free inquiry and enable a robust discussion of the pros and cons of federal health policy. One message or a whole bunch of different conflicting messages? What do you think? And I hope we can get people who haven't spoken so far to jump in on this one. Naomi.
Well, I think this touches on free speech. And
Yeah.
I think that was a real problem through the pandemic because there were so many doctors that had a different opinion on what was going on, and they were gaslit, they were kicked off social media, and their message wasn't allowed to be heard, not in the mainstream channels. And I think that's really dangerous when you aren't allowed to question authority, because then you're looking at a totalitarian situation. So, so I guess that's the answer to your question. My answer to your question.
All right. Anybody else? If not, I'll turn it over. Going once, going twice. Oh, Suzanne. Please unmute.
Thank you. Okay. Just as a follow-up to that comment, all we have to do is go back and look at the history of medical recommendations that have been made and that have been said, no, this is not what we want. We now have the research that supported a different point of view. And I think that, you know, probably there will be these kinds of one size fits all, but I think we each have an opportunity to look at recommendations. You know, the recommendation fat in the diet will kill you. Well, we know that's not true now. Smoking has no negative issues with the human body. We know that's not true. And I think that it doesn't take being a scientist. It takes looking at common sense and finding some answers on these things. And then the other point that I think needs to be made is that science has never been one answer, ever. The purpose of scientific research is to find out the variations, to find out, yes, on some things there is a clear point of view that research supports. But I know during this pandemic, I just would go like, oh my gosh, follow the science. Well, you know, the implication being there is only one science answer, and that has never, ever been true. Just talk to people who do research, and, you know, there can be a consensus, but it changes. And I think that needs to be brought out by all of us, in addition to the question of, you know, it being the whole question of free speech. So those are just my thoughts.
Thanks for that. Let's do Ellen, Lisa, and then Shan to close it up. Ellen.
I'm sorry. Shan is the one who everybody has kind of spoken, but Shan hasn't much. So I recommend we try Shan and then go on to another question, if that's okay, because other people have spoken a lot.
Right. Shan.
Hi, thank you. Hi. Yeah, I guess I don't agree with the way that this question is even worded. I think it's funny that they're alleging, whoever put this question together, that there were disparate messages. It was consistent across the board. It was called lockstep for a reason. Every single town, every single city, state, country, etc., had the same answers. I'd go outside and the bus driving down the street would tell me what to do. So pardon me if I don't want to hear about a federal health policy when I pick up the phone to order something on Uber Eats, and Uber Eats tells me not to come to the door outside where my food is until the person got back in their car and drove away. There was more than a consistent message spread everywhere, whether it was a commercial, whether it was a children's magazine. I couldn't put on the Disney Channel for my kid because of the commercials. It was so prevalent everywhere. There was no escaping. Everyone said 6 feet. Everyone said stay home,
Okay.
stay safe. Okay, you're gonna cut me off? Okay, thanks, sir.
Thanks. Sorry, we have to move on. Oh, okay. You want,
Yeah, let's let her. I haven't been timing people anyway, and so I'm gonna start again to keep people to 2 minutes. Right, let's let Shan finish because I know she hadn't spoken yet, and she was using the chat a lot. This way, it's better to be verbal.
Okay, thank you. I just feel like we were completely spoken at. We were talked down to. We were trying to reach out to our government, local, state level, and we were being rebuffed. The emails were full. They weren't getting back to us. The phone calls were going into a voicemail box. So I don't think that there was ever an interest to get the information from the public. And if you did say something about the efficacy of the, face masks or the vaccine, you tended to be insulted and belittled by those people. That was all that I was going to say.
okay. Well, Molly, I think we ought to move on.
That's probably a good idea. Yeah, we've been on this question for a while, and people can see if what you wanted to say is related to what Stephanie is going to now bring up. Actually, it seems very relevant so far to what we've been hearing. That Stephanie is going to bring up a similar topic. Go for it, Stephanie.
Yeah. So we're, and I think what I'm hearing in between some lines is that if we knew that we could trust that this is a vaccine that will do what it says we could do, we may not be adverse to the vaccine per se, but the biggest issue really is the trust. So what do you think caused the growth in Americans' distrust of government medical institutions? And I'll throw, big pharma on there too. So Suzanne, you're first in the queue. Go ahead. You need to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think it's just been so many things. I think that part of what I, said before, what really got me was when it became, this is the way it is done. This is the science. And my professional field involves science. That was the biggest lie to me. And you see something like that and you go, how do I know what to believe? The other part of it is I'm the only one who knows my own body. And the party line that was being stated again, that to me just did not fit and just put my trust all the way down, was the idea that everybody's body needs the same thing. I happen to have a body that's got a lot of allergic sensitivities, and I was as rigorous in my approach to other people and to myself, using a different way of addressing the risks to me and to other people. And that was really not acknowledged. And so I think taking that back to the direct question, when you see many, many things that are very clearly exaggerations or lies, for me, it says, what else should I believe or not believe? And it's not saying I don't believe it, but I really question it much more than if things had been presented as, this is what we recommend, but there are other ways too.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
Okay, well, just about the trust issue, one of the biggest ways you can lose trust is by censoring people and stopping debate. And so just going back to that, what I was going to say about the censorship issue, this is what freaked me out. It really changed my view on the world and our government. Was during COVID, I shared an NIH paper about hydroxychloroquine working very well, and another FOIA request of Anthony Fauci's private emails. So I shared two sources of government information, and I got kicked off of Facebook at the behest of the government for 1 month each time. And that was dystopian. And it made me say, like, whoa, this is a narrative, this is an agenda. This is not about health or information. So the censorship causes us to lose trust.
For sure, for sure. Thanks for sharing that experience. So yeah, Ellen, why don't you go ahead, and then I think we'll move on to one more question, or we want to start wrapping up, right, Donna, pretty soon?
We have time. We have time.
Okay. Okay, Ellen, go ahead.
All right. I'll be quick. Kind of like what everyone else was saying, and it's just like this spiral of like, it's like, it's horrible because it's real, but it's like you can't make it up. It's just like, it's beyond the censoring, although of course it's that. It's like the outright mocking and trying to take away the licenses of the doctors who had the most truth to say. Like people who were like just trying to share that, the study that showed hydroxychloroquine, excuse me, causes heart problems and kills people and doesn't work. Like, yes, there is a study that concluded that, but they gave like orders of magnitude high doses, known to be lethal doses, and they gave it way too late. And one other thing, an article I'll put in the chat where like there was evidence, and I wasn't paying attention to this at the time. I had my own like Trump derangement syndrome, and I was just listening to the left, so I wasn't paying attention. But to people who were, there is proof that from February of 2020, so much talk around the world about hydroxychloroquine and it being studied and seeming really promising. And nobody in Western media mentioned it at all until the day a certain man mentioned HCQ. And then they just like jumped on it as if this ridiculous conspiracy by Donald Trump. And any honest system would have started there and been like, wow, like what, last thing, Dr. Richard Urso at Ron Johnson's hearings. There's someone on Rumble called Sunfellow on COVID. They have a lot of good links. Ron Johnson had a lot of people, some of the most, involved from day one, doctors and investigative journalists, et cetera, assemble to speak in Vaccine Injured. He's done this a few times. I tried to share this with my mom, and she is just so disgusted by Ron Johnson because of what the media puts in her mind. But anyway, Dr. Richard Urso said, on day one, we did not know how to treat the novel coronavirus, but we knew how to treat the inflammation, coagulation, and viral replication that we were seeing in front of us. Mm-hmm. So they should have been listened to, and when how they were treated can't be unseen.
Okay. Do we have time for one more answer, Donna, or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Karina.
Thank you. So I know somebody who died within less than 24 hours. He died actually within 12 or 13 hours. And I know other people who have been injured. And actually the reason why I got even at all interested in the subject was, well, first I just watched a documentary in 2017, but within a year, my client got a flu shot and she ended up in a coma for a month. She was basically, she really hesitated to take the shot, but she was working at a hospital. So she was kind of forced in order not to lose her job. And so she basically ended up having, it was called acute necrotizing encephalitis, which if you ever, and this is what I would recommend to anybody who's even a little bit skeptical, grab an insert from whatever vaccine that you're considering, right? Which I would recommend not considering any of them, but let's say, just say you're just studying, right? Or just exploring, grab an insert and read, it's all there. So in the insert, it says very clearly, known side effect and vaccine injuries, encephalitis or encephalopathy. And she basically, to this day, she was 28 years at the time. To this day, since 2018, she's been nonverbal, physically incapacitated. And honestly, like I could not, I spent 4 months basically with them in the hospital, going every day trying to figure out what to do, because this poor girl was just, for a month she was completely out. And then when she came back online, from the coma, you could just tell that she was so damaged, right? And so when you see something like this upfront and personal, you cannot unsee it, right? And it forces you to learn more. And then I ended up basically meeting thousands of families literally at the State House, or they were giving testimonies. And I have to say, the disrespect that I saw from the legislators fueled me so much, because I thought these poor people, right, have gone through hell, and they're not even getting the respect, right, to even just be heard, right? The legislators are literally sitting there tweeting some nonsense, so talking about how these people must have gotten the education on YouTube. It's ridiculous. So thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question for Molly.
Last question, and we do have only a couple minutes left, so I'm going to say I'll just take an answer, maybe two. And I'm really interested in the fact that people did their own research, and I think that one problem is about how we assess scientific research. Being trained in doing that seems lacking, at least in my own education, in a very good public school in St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm from. So the question is this: what would it look like for K-12 schools to teach the skill of assessing and analyzing scientific research on health-related issues? So some things I've heard tonight: documentaries looking at studies, which obviously published by the government. I think they have to be peer-reviewed studies. Having more open information. Like, what would it look like for the skill of assessing this research be like? What would it be like if the schools actually shared that with people in schools from a young age, so that they would know how to do it? I think that's what a lot of the problem comes down to for me. Yeah, Naomi, go for it.
Actually, I'm not going to answer your question.
Okay.
But it made me think, we keep focusing on research, and Karina brought up the point that, she knew someone personally that had a vaccine injury that ruined her life. It took away her life. And I'm a mother of 2 young adult children who are completely and fully vaccinated. And I did every single one. And I believed my doctor, and I listened to my doctor. And both of my children had chronic health issues. And I beat my head against a wall for a number of years. And I tried everything. And I went to second and third opinions. And I had a friend who kept saying to me, Naomi, you really should look into vaccines. And I didn't want to hear it, because I thought that was crazy. Well, he's 23. It's happening again. It's the word. I mean, this movie actually gave me PTSD, I have to say. It was an insult to all of the families that have lived with vaccine injury. It has destroyed their family. It's destroyed them financially. I'm going to cry. So I think we have to step away from research a little bit and ask ourselves, why didn't this movie interview some of those families and their experiences? Or, he brought out, Paul Offit and who's the other guy? I forget his name. These 2 doctors who work on vaccines as the only voice of the medical profession in that movie. It didn't touch on, Dr. Bhattacharya, who's an epidemiologist, or, Dr. McCullough, all these other doctors who are incredibly, well established and highly respected. And, their voices and the families of the vaccine injured, it was kind of an insult to all of the people who have suffered. I mean, they made reference to VAERS. They made reference to VAERS. It was just mentioned, but VAERS is the vaccine injury reporting system, where that millions of reports are. Like, we haven't, who are those people? Those people aren't just numbers. So anyway, sorry. I felt that had to be said. I'm sorry if I took over your question for a second.
No, you're not the only one who went over time. And I know it's a very emotional issue for a lot of people. I can tell that from this call, and more so than I realized. I'm going to take one person. I'm so sorry. No, there are three. I don't care if we go a little over, but we want to be honest about, or want to be not going more than like maybe 5 hours. So Elizabeth, if you have an answer to the question, I'd like to get, and thank you, Naomi, for sharing your personal background. I'd like to hear from Elizabeth on an answer to the question about about assessing scientific research.
Yes. I was going to answer this. First of all, this was not the discussion I thought that would be happening, but it was much more interesting than I thought it would be. I think a lot of people have brought up a point that I mean, I've not really thought very much about this. I'm generally pro-vaccination, but watching the film, I had the same kind of ideas because I think, so as background, I'm a litigator and I worked for a long time with pharmaceutical companies. And I'm very skeptical of pharmaceutical companies. And I think what the documentary did was made me more skeptical of vaccines, even though it was meant, I guess, it felt like propaganda because it didn't seem like they were doing strong arguments on the other side. And I thought, why aren't you, as a litigator, you have two people going after each other with the strongest arguments. You prepare for the strongest arguments. You don't give off like a fake kind of case because you know that someone on the other side has the scientific research and they're fiscally and egotistically motivated to destroy you with everything that they have. And I think if we were doing K through 12 education, and we're doing health, I think what would give a lot of people a lot of trust is if you didn't have the censorship, if you had someone red teaming your argument, giving you the all the strong and the low points so that people can make their own decisions for themselves. I will also say that because I think my doctors know that I'm a lawyer, they treat me, I think, differently than other people. They do not talk to me. I was talking to a doctor and she was saying like,
I want to hear the end of
the science, but I was saying that she very specifically, she like corrected herself and said, there are some studies that show this. There's some studies that show that, here are the pros and cons of it. And I thought that was really interesting because I had not asked any questions. And I thought, I don't think that doctors treat everyone like this. I think they prescribe certain things, not believe that they can make choices for themselves. And I think Americans want to be able to do that. They want the information and they want the respect and dignity of hearing all sides.
Thank you. And we're going to have to close us out with that answer. It irks me because I would love to hear from everybody. Suzanne and Lola, if you want to put what you were like a summary of what we're going to say just down in the chat. We're about to talk about Braver Angels membership for just a brief minute and then share the next film. And thank you everyone for sharing tonight. I know we got cut short at the end. I want to thank people for talking a lot about the idea of doing your own research and thinking critically about what that means. And even in listening to you all, what I learned tonight is like my emphasis on like, double-blind studies and government peer-reviewed research should be supplemented with things like making sure you're like looking at whether there's open discussion in society in general. And I think what you guys were saying is very relevant, which is not to shut people down. That's hugely important. That's a very Braver Angels message. Listen to people fully. Even with a small group tonight, we obviously couldn't hear everyone all the time thoroughly. So please do share any more things. And if you want to save the chat, you don't know how to do that, you can do it with the 3 dots in the corner, and then you click on those 3 dots and click save chat if there's things you want to have for the future. Okay, Stephanie, as we wrap up this really, really deep and challenging discussion, I want to thank everybody and transition to you, Stephanie, to talk about Braver Angels membership.
Yeah, so, Braver Angels is leading the nation's largest not bipartisan volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide and for the good of our democratic republic. Membership is as little as $12 a year, and your support keeps the work going and entitles you to members-only events and activities. And I recently went to the convention, and it was, I've been going to conferences for decades for my career, and this was the friendliest conference I have ever been to. So just seeing how Reds and Blues and independents can all work together and treat each other was really an inspiration for me. So, get involved or support the cause. Either is great.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. And now I'll talk a bit about our next movie we're going to be discussing at the end of October, and that is called War Game. This is a documentary about a real simulation and it was put up on by a Veterans Foundation with roles played by government officials from previous Republican and Democratic administrations. It's about what might happen if there were a insurrection against the government that included participation by some members of the National Guard and a U.S. general, and then which spread to some state capitals. So basically, it's not just average citizens, it's if the National Guard or generals were to get involved as well, what might happen. So that's called War Game, and we'll be sharing information about that pretty soon. So thank you everybody for coming. It's been a fascinating conversation, and please join Braver Angels if you're not a member. And with that, hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.